Good evening, Energy Rogue Nation. Welcome back to another weather discussion. Thank you all so much for tuning in. It has been a while since the last time we did a video here. A lot of the discussions of late have been written, and you guys have enjoyed those, so I will continue to kind of mix and mingle in content as I see fit. But of course, if you have any feedback for me on how you like these deliverables disseminated, whether that's video or written, feel free to let me know, and I'm happy to oblige. But like I said, I'm trying to stick to a little bit of a good, healthy mix because I think there's value in both. For tonight, I had mentioned in yesterday's discussion that I was going to be providing probabilities by nat gas site or by location. I have decided to defer that to tomorrow, and the only reason why, as we'll see in tonight's discussion, is that there is still a good amount of uncertainty with the forecast. Timing, as you'll see, has been also changing still. You'll find that this colder pattern that we're expecting for Texas and potential freeze-offs is likely to come as soon as Saturday, as opposed to my initial thought, which was going to be the 21st to the 23rd, I believe I said. So we're seeing model guidance go a little bit earlier, but we're also seeing uncertainty on the magnitude of the cold. So in supplement of that, what I'm going to be doing tonight is providing the probabilities by sort of subregions within Texas as well as Oklahoma. And then tomorrow, once we have more guidance, I'm then going to break those probabilities down by actual location. So it's not that that's not a priority, it's just that, as you'll see in tonight's discussion, it is... as the political pundits would say on election night, too early to call. So that is why I am deferring that piece of the equation to tomorrow. Hopefully you guys follow my method to my madness. You will see why here during this discussion. So let's start first with this. I always look at the Jetstream 500 millibar map. I find that it really does tell a story. And when we talk about weather at this scale, something that I want you to note here, we use this term in meteorology called synoptic scale, right? And I won't dive into the specifics on it, but think of synoptic as big picture. And think of, say, more surface level observations as the mesoscale, or in this case, we'll just abbreviate it as meso. Synoptic scale we look at as in meteorology, again, as a big picture approach. We want to be able to diagnose what the overall jet pattern and upper level pattern is doing to then help to understand or also elaborate on conditions that are happening closer to the surface, because our atmosphere, as we've talked about, is a fluid, and as a result of that, it's dynamic, and because of that feature, we then see that weather aloft many cases transcends to the surface and has some level of impact. And that is certainly the case here. So that's how we're going to lead off tonight's discussion. And we are looking at the GFS model as of this evening. And there's a couple of things to note with this that are pretty unique. And the first one is you have this big peak across much of the Pacific Northwest and the West Coast. We've talked about this quite a bit here on the channel. That is referring to an upper level ridge, very much synonymous with high pressure. But what's different here is that we have another unique feature, and that is this guy out in the East Central Pacific, also known as a cutoff low. And the way to understand cutoff lows is pretty much implied in the name. A cutoff low is when a low pressure system is cut off from the rest of the flow. So typically, you would expect an area of low pressure to be where these little valleys are, maybe like one over here by Oklahoma, Texas. And there is, downstream of it, you'd usually find a low by Arkansas in that case. So here's your trough, and then downstream of your trough at the surface is your low pressure system, and that is pretty common. It's embedded within the flow. In this case, we have a cutoff low, and that is separate from the main jet flow. Now, if we carry this cutoff low, keep an eye on this feature, into what would be Thursday and then eventually Friday. By the time we get to that Friday morning period, that cutoff low is now right near the panhandle of Oklahoma, Texas, and then New Mexico. And with that, you probably see these strong, vibrant red colors across the map. This is indicative of westerly flow. And now the important key here is that this westerly flow is coming off of the Pacific. If we know anything about the Pacific, as my nose is running here, apologize, better go catch it. If we know anything about the Pacific, you got westerly flow coming across that's bringing in more of that milder air. And so as a result, we are expecting to see temperatures in central Texas by the time we get to Friday afternoon, could see some spots reaching anywhere between the high 60s to even 70 in some places. So very, very above normal for this time of year. And we'll take a look at the temperature anomalies here in a moment. But that is only going to last so long. As a matter of fact, when I say that, it's only going to probably last until Friday evening into Saturday morning. Because watch what happens here as we get towards what would be that Saturday morning period. We see this big surge of northwesterly winds begin to kick in across the Panhandle, Texas, and Oklahoma. And if we know anything about wind orientation, look, we just talked about it. In this case, we're going from westerly to northwesterly. We're going from mild air being pumped in to more of that colder air being pulled down from Canada. And so that's where a lot of that cold air is going to be coming from, that Arctic air that we're expecting to see across much of Texas as soon as what would really be Saturday, and I would even argue beginning Saturday morning, but staying more consistent Saturday evening into Sunday morning. And that is also expected to continue as we go into Tuesday. So really 3 days of opportunity for some freeze-offs across much of Texas and even Oklahoma. And I'll even just highlight it here for now. We'll talk about it more throughout the video. But the days I'm looking at is Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and then a tad bit of Tuesday. This time frame is what I'm very concerned about for freeze-offs. Last time we forecasted for freeze-offs, we didn't really see much of it. And for the most part, we had some more conservative lower-end probabilities. So I would argue it's somewhat verified. But, I remember on one of those forecasts, we had about a 60% chance on, I think, that first day. We didn't really see much freeze-off activity, so not much verification on that front. But what's different this time around is we are expecting to see a pretty significant cold air advection regime across much of Texas. We talk a lot about the Panhandle, we talk a lot about the Red River Valley, but what about the areas like Houston and San Antonio? Areas that are incredibly vulnerable to even temperatures in the 30s to these freeze-offs. I mean, the Panhandle, they typically prep for this, as well as some of these northerly latitude areas of Texas. Not to say that they're not susceptible to freeze-offs, but if there's anybody that's more vulnerable, it's the sites across this area. Anywhere in east central Texas, central, and then even in parts of south central Texas, we have to keep an eye on. So this continues again. You see that cold air regime, a lot of west-northwesterly flow continuing into what would be Monday night. We eventually see that system move out of the region by the time we get to Wednesday afternoon, and then that's going to be superseded likely by some milder conditions. Certainly not to the degree that what we saw, or what we will see on Friday, but nonetheless, we are introducing westerly flow across Texas, and that is going to bring in, once again, some of those milder temperatures. And as a reminder, we are looking at the GFS, so let's also then apply this to our temperature anomalies. And you can see here, and this is actually standard anomalies. I may have commented before that this is well above normal. I would actually retract that statement because 70 degrees for Texas at this time of year, I think, is at near normal or slightly above. It's not way above. I think I was a little bit foot on the gas with that one, so please strike that statement, because definitely by the looks of it, this would be, from climatological point of view, pretty much on par with what we would expect for normals. But temperatures expected to reach right around the 70s in some parts of central Texas. But look at that cold air by the time we get to Saturday afternoon and evening. We are talking about, in some cases, -2 to -3 sigma below the mean. So when we're talking about standard temp anomalies, we're really looking at the concept of standard deviation. So anytime we see -2 or -3, that's a pretty big drop. We're talking about well below normal temperatures and freezing for sure across much of Texas. And I know that might be a little bit off-putting considering the colors here. You look at that and go, I mean, it's not, it looks like a light blue. It doesn't look severe. It's because we're using a very small scale. We're using standard deviation as our metric here. And so if you see, for example, the Panhandle, I mean, in that case, according to the GFS, by the time we got to Sunday morning, you're looking at temperature anomalies even between -3 to -4 sigma below the mean, which is pretty darn cold, almost record-breaking, depending on, the spot. But I'm not expecting record-breaking cold, but it certainly is going to be pretty significant and well below normal. Now, we can take a look at this from the European model point of view. And so if we go back here, and by the way, the Euro does not have the standard temperature anomalies, at least on COD. So before we hop over to the Euro, let's actually go back to the GFS, and let me just show you what the output looks like. So we head on over into Friday, and you can see, look at all of that warmth, right? So remember, we have westerly flow aloft, but as a result of that, in the lower levels, we have southerly winds being convected, and even in this case, more of the southwesterly up towards central Texas. If this was severe weather season, we'd be talking about a dry line here, and I don't know if there is or not. I'm not going to mess around with that because I don't want to completely go off the beaten path here, but if we were talking severe weather, southerly flow, southwesterly, and then you got backed, perfect recipe for a significant severe weather outbreak. That's not going to be the case here, at least by what our forecasts are showing. But interestingly enough, as that low moves through, by the time we get to Friday night and Saturday morning, look at this temperature drop across even central Texas. Keep an eye on this, right? GFS is showing 70 degrees just to the west of the Dallas Metroplex. And then as that cold front begins to pass through, we get back to winds. We go from southwesterly to northerly. And we're looking at temperatures around 26 degrees by the time we get to Sunday morning. So right around that 24-hour time frame, so within 24 hours from Friday night, call it even late Friday afternoon into Sunday morning, we are talking about possibly as much as a 50-degree temperature swing across much of central Texas. You can even see up towards the Panhandle by the time we did get to Sunday morning, temperatures in the teens, maybe making it by the 20s. We'll talk more about that here in a moment, but for the most part, pretty darn cold. And if you go through the afternoon, you see those temperatures still remain below freezing across much of northern Texas. You can see that a little bit south towards Nacogdoches, and then I believe the Colonies is down here, and then you have Houston. This area does remain above freezing by the time we get to the afternoon, which we would, again, expect being closer to the Gulf, considering the wind flow. But then as we get towards Monday, that's where we get a little bit concerning still. But as you see, we do end up warming up by the afternoon across much of the region, with the exception being the Panhandle. And so if we take this into Tuesday, we see a very similar thing, right? Freezing temperatures in the morning, but then eventually warming up by the afternoon. And then also then seeing a secondary low pressure system form by Thursday afternoon following the cold air. Let's then compare this over to the European model, and we'll circle right back here. We head into what would be Friday. Again, pretty good consensus. Some spots reaching 70s with that southwesterly flow at the surface, bringing along that warm front, warming up some of those temperatures. As the low moves through, we do see that cold air begin to advect further south across much of Texas. Now, the one thing I'm going to say here is you can probably tell, right? So let's just focus on Sunday for a second. You can see we dip down towards the teens for the Panhandle. We're well into the 20s across much of central Texas, even some spots towards Nacogdoches being around that freezing mark. But then you do notice that by the afternoon, we do slightly warm up across Houston area and even San Antonio, still remaining below freezing across much of northern and central Texas, even towards the Panhandle, east central Texas too, honorable mention. And then by the time we get to Tuesday, and this would actually be Monday night, we were looking at single digits for the Panhandle, and then eventually warming up by the afternoon as well. Although I will say, let me pause a moment on that. Looks like Tuesday on the Euro has much of Texas below freezing. This brings up a good point. So we can tell by these two models there's a pretty significant difference. The GFS is less bullish on cold air advection extent getting as far south as Houston and San Antonio. They keep a lot of the cold mostly confined to the Red River Valley and points slightly south, east, and west. But the Euro on Tuesday doesn't have warm air recovering. As a matter of fact, it has this low pressure system basically preventing any warm air advection from getting further north into Houston, which would then lead to that colder air regime. I personally believe that the Euro is way too aggressive with the cold. It's aggressive on its temperature, but it's also aggressive on its progression. This low placement is really up in the air. There's a lot of uncertainty even with that. And to be quite honest with you, we have seen the Euro throughout this past winter be way too aggressive with progression. I am not confident in the slightest about Houston, for example, or much of southeastern Texas not getting above freezing Tuesday afternoon. I side more with the GFS and our other models in our suite that are indicating temperatures warming up across that region. So I want to be very deliberate about that. I have noticed run by run the European model, in my expertise, in my opinion, being way too aggressive with the cold. The GFS is a lot more, we'll call it realistic. But of course, with that all in mind, the one thing I also want to mention is that these models, the GFS and the Euro, are coarse in resolution, meaning that these temperatures, especially with the biases that exist, are likely off by about a few degrees. That's something we have to price in. Either way, here's what this all means for the forecast itself. I am anticipating that, especially, and it's hard to nail down a day, but I would argue that the best opportunity right now for cold, and for, let's rephrase this, for freeze-offs, the best opportunity for freeze-offs is going to be Sunday. And I'll write the probability here for each one. So Sunday, forecast probs, and I'll even say Saturday into Sunday. So we'll say Saturday into Sunday. The probability of freeze-offs, especially for north central Texas and the Panhandle, right now, preliminarily, I'm putting at about a 70% chance, which is the highest probability I've introduced for freeze-offs this season. As we do what would be Sunday night and Monday, so we'll just, for the sake of it, call it Monday, I have the probability at about a 60% chance. And then as that system, that ridge begins to move eastward, when we get to Tuesday, this is where I have the least confidence. I'm placing about a 30% chance on that. So you can see the progression here on the probability forecast for freeze-offs, again, with the emphasis being the Panhandle and much of north central Texas and east central Texas. I'm not including south central or southeastern in this forecast for that reason. Saturday, Sunday, 70% chance across this area of the state, including also Oklahoma. Monday, 60%, so we see that probability decrease slightly. And then the biggest drop would be between Monday and Tuesday, where I have a forecast about a 30% chance of freeze-offs for what would really be Sunday night to Monday, Monday night into Tuesday. So Monday night into Tuesday, 30% chance. Tuesday into Wednesday, we should see temperatures gradually warm up by the time we get to that point. But here's my probabilities from just a general point of view. So let's recap. Let's put a bow on this. And if you have any questions, be sure to post those in the comments below, and also be sure to message on Discord. But just to really summarize this here, the highest probability that exists for freeze-offs, in my opinion, is that Saturday and Sunday time frame. I have about a 70% chance. By the way, the days could change. It could actually be earlier than that, slightly. However, whatever that first day ends up being, I see as the highest probability regardless. But right now, that remains to be Saturday and Sunday. Monday, that drops to about a 60% chance. Tuesday, 30% chance. And the area of focus specifically is this subregion of Texas, east central Texas, north central, Red River Valley, and the Panhandle. Like I said, Tomorrow, we're going to be introducing specific sites, especially as we get better model guidance closer to the event. We can start to really define some of those temperatures and those questions that remain. And we will also be doing a forecast discussion in the Discord server. So if you are not an Energy Rogue subscriber, head on over to energyrogue.com to be a part of that. We'll be doing the forecast office hours, which has been a tradition here at Energy Rogue. So definitely recommend you guys checking that out and being part of the discussion. We'll be going over all of this live. And then for my European folks, we have not forgotten about you. We will be doing a Euro weather discussion, although that will be a recorded video. Like I said, if you have any questions, you know where to find me, the Weather Rogue Discord channel. You can also leave a comment down below. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and we will see you tomorrow with another weather discussion. Take care.